O'Brien simply did not trust Major Kira. Her attitude toward authority in Starfleet was often openly contemptuous. But she surprised him. She listened to Sisko's orders without question and led her small contingent to Quarks with the cool competence of a born commander. O'Brien finally began to understand. This was something she wanted to do because it might help her people. Which was just as well, because by the time they arrived at the casino, the place was packed with dark-uniformed Cardies. A roar came from one of the tables, followed by raucous laughter. The Cardassians were winning. Kira strode into the center of them, filched a mug from one of them, too inebriated to protest, and banged it on the bar. "Can we have your attention, please? This establishment is being closed." O'Brien tensed, reached for the phaser that was not there, and once again cursed Odo's arbitrary rule against phasers on the promenade. Quark pushed his way toward her, a small bundle of fury, and swiped at the air in front of her with a clawed hand.
"What do you mean? You can't do this!"
O'Brien stepped forward at his cue and delivered his line smoothly. "If you have a problem, sir, you'll have to take it up with Commander Sisko." Quark wheeled on him, trembling with rage.
"I intend to. This is outrageous."
He smoothed his tone and addressed the crowd.
"My apologies, friends. A minor misunderstanding that will be rectified shortly."
He turned to his pit boss.
"Give them something to put their winnings in."
The boss nodded. A little too knowingly? O'Brien worried, but the Cardies seemed to be buying it. They began scooping up winnings and stuffing gold into the knapsack. Quite a lot of gold. One of them hoisted it with difficulty. It was bound to be very heavy. Inside the knapsack, Odo fought panic. The weight of the gold pressed down on him, making breathing seem difficult. He relaxed into a near-mindless state by focusing instead on the sounds. The ring of 3 pairs of boots against a metal deck. The drone of self-satisfied, drunken voices speaking Cardassian. The panic eased. Odo tuned in completely, listening for the proper moment to make his transition. They were inside the ship now. Footsteps stopped. The sound of a small door swinging on a hinge. A locker. They had put the knapsack inside. Odo waited for the footsteps to fade entirely. That made the change. Oozing out from underneath the gold, between the cracks of the locker, down the bulkhead to the deck. He drew a deep, unimpeded breath, then hurried down the corridor to his destination, the Cardassian warship's computer center. At his engineering control station in Ops, O'Brien studied the readout with a sense of victory and lifted his face toward Major Kira with something very close to a smile. "Lieutenant, scanners are picking up fluctuations in the Cardassians' energy distribution net." Kira checked her panels and reacted with frank delight. "Their computer is crashing. Shields and sensors are down." On the landing pad of the station's inner ring, Sisko and Dax now sat in the runabout's cockpit. It was a small vessel, sturdy, scarcely larger than an escape pod. Kira's voice filtered through the comm grid on the runabout's control panel. "Commander, we're in business. Odo has completed his mission. Now's the time to get going." Sisko ignored the fact that his heart had begun to beat faster. "Beginning launch sequence." Beside him, Dax worked navigation with comm efficiency. O'Brien's voice was on the comm. "Cleared for departure." Dax swiveled toward him. Course laid in. Sisko drew a breath as the runabout rose and sailed away from the station, into his future. Back at the station, Kira looked down at the flashing signal on her master control panel and called over to O'Brien. "Odo's reached the transport site." O'Brien answered, "Trying to lock on." O'Brien knew if Odo didn't make his exit in time to avoid detection, the entire operation would be in jeopardy. He pressed the control that should have activated energization immediately, but nothing happened. The damnable Cardi technology refused to cooperate. Swiftly, he pressed another control to initiate an emergency backup sequence. Nothing. He put the damn thing on manual and tried to program the sequence in himself. Nothing. Damn it! O'Brien gave the panel a swift, solid kick. The beam activated. The pad began to shimmer, and Odo fully materialized. Major Kira grinned at the shapeshifter. Nice work, Constable. The runabout glided at impulse into the Denorius. Sisko glanced up at viewscreen, taking in the sight of stars, glittering behind swirls of blue dust. On Dax's monitor, a grid of Denorius blinked at them, showing their location on the perimeter. Approaching grid perimeter, slowing to 1/4 impulse. Dax leaned forward to check a sensor reading and drew back in surprise. "Computer, give me visual at bearing 23, mark 217, range 3,100 kilometers." The display wavered and changed to the requested sector. Dax frowned slightly at the data on the monitor. "Sensors are picking up unusually high proton counts." Sisko, without pausing to think, set a new course to those coordinates, heading for the center of the disturbance. O'Brien's voice crackled over the comm. "Lieutenant, in that asteroid belt, you could be looking at chondrite echoes." Dax's frown grew deeper as she worked her panel with both hands. "I don't think so. The neutrino disturbances are getting stronger as we approach the coordinates." Sisko checked his own readouts. "Whatever it is, it's not affecting our systems." Dax's eyes widened with scientific awe. "All external wave intensities are increasing exponentially, but..." Checking. "Confirmed. There is no corresponding increase inside the cabin. How is that The runabout lurched. Sisko threw up his hand to shield his eyes from the dazzling burst of light. Sisko blinked. The readout screens were dark. He glanced over at Dax, who was fidgeting with the comm controls. "Sensors aren't functioning." He was going to ask her what had happened, but it was clear enough from her expression that she knew no more than he. She spoke again, in a voice that once again reminded him of old Curzon. "We've lost all contact with the station." Sisko stared down at the useless, darkened sensor screens and vainly tried to revive the controls. The view screen revealed no stars, only flickering rainbow light. He called to Dax over the sounds of the ship shuddering. "Are your navigational readings going crazy?" Dax gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "I'll recalibrate them when I have a moment." The runabout reeled again. Sisko gritted his teeth and clutched his panel, managing to stay in his seat. Slowly, easily, the craft righted herself. Screens flickered. The main viewer dimmed, then brightened, this time with stars. But the configuration was wrong. This was not the Denorius belt. He swiveled toward Dax. "Can you get a fix on our coordinates?" "There's a star just under 5 light years away. No M-class planets. Computer, identify closest star system." Idran, a ternary system consisting of a central supergiant and twin O-type companions. Dax had the gleam of scientific revelation in her eye. Computer, basis of identification. Identification of Idran is based on the hydrogen alpha spectral analysis conducted in the 22nd century by the Quadros 1 probe of the Gamma Quadrant. Sisko's lower jaw dropped. The Gamma Quadrant? 70,000 light years from Bajor. I'd say we just found our way into a wormhole. Dax's expression was one of dawning wonder. It's not like any wormhole I've ever seen. There were none of the usual resonance waves. They stared at the stars for a few seconds, until Sisko wondered aloud, "Do you think this is how the orbs found their way into the Bajorn system?" Not an unreasonable hypothesis. If it's true, that would mean this has been here for at least 1,000 years. We might have just discovered the first stable wormhole known to exist. She finally smiled. You may want to wait until we get safely back before you put your name in the history books, Benjamin. Our names, old man, our names. Bring us about, Lieutenant. As Dax brought the vessel around and they ventured again into the wormhole, Sisko relaxed enough to appreciate the beauty of the flashing prismatic colors around them. This is even better than finding the Celestial Temple. Think about it. A stable wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant in Bajorn space is going to solve a lot more of their problems than the Kai ever could. Expeditions from countless worlds will be coming through here now. They'll give Bajor an economic base, a way to rebuild, a perfect capstone. Dax frowned suddenly. What are you talking about, Benjamin? I'll probably be leaving soon. Going back to Earth. To do what? The University at Vesteris thinks I might have something to offer their astrionics program. A professor? The ship began to shudder, and Dax turned sadly from him and worked her controls. The runabout's vibrations eased. Dax said, I'm modifying the flight program to compensate for the spatial discontinuities. We should have a smoother ride this time. Sisko frowned, holding perfectly still, trying to tune in to his pilot's instinct. Did you reduce impulse power? We're losing velocity. She checked her panels. Power output is still constant. Sisko checked the control panel readout. We're down to 120 kph. Computer, identify cause of deceleration. Cause unknown. The answer was hardly reassuring. Dax looked at her screen. Velocity is still falling. Sisko stared back at his screen, incredulous. Engine output is running 70% above normal. Warning. Impulse system overload. Auto shutdown in 12 seconds. Sisko gave up the struggle. No point in damaging the engines. He reached out to press a toggle. Disengaging engines. I'm picking up an atmosphere, Benjamin. Inside a wormhole? She glanced back at her screen. Capable of supporting life. She and Sisko were suddenly thrown forward in their chair by the impact. The runabout shuddered once, briefly, then grew still. Dax checked her instruments. We've landed. On what? For some curious reason, he remembered the dream he'd had the night before he'd arrived at the station, and the sense of mystery, the sense of coming home. Together, he and Dax stepped out of the tiny craft. Out of habit and instinct, Sisko drew his phaser and set it on stun. The desert landscape was unfamiliar, brutal, anything but welcoming. A bleak expanse of rock cliffs stretched to the horizon, illumined by flashes from electrical storms in the dark, forbidding sky. Sisko narrowed his eyes against the stinging wind. Dax followed, tricorder in hand. She took in the surroundings with an appreciative smile. It's beautiful. He glanced out at the dead horizon and back at Dax with a raised brow. You have a strange eye for beauty. It can't beat the sulfuric mine pits of Hades IV. How can you say that? The colors, all the flora. He turned to her. I don't see any flora, Dax. She turned her head to study her surroundings. We're standing in a garden. Sisko shook his head. We're standing on a rock face. Do you see the storms? She shot him an uneasy look. Clear as a summer's day. Roughly 7 meters away, a ball of brilliant green light, identical in appearance to the orb that now rested in DS9's laboratory, sailed toward them through the sky. The orb stopped, hesitated a few meters from them, then began emitting a single green beam of light, scanning Cisco from head to foot. Dax, in turn, scanned the beam with her tricorder. Low-level ionic pattern. It's probing us. Cisco relaxed as the beam left him and turned its attentions on Dax. Someone's idea of shaking hands, maybe. When the scan was finished, Cisco stepped forward to speak. I am Commander Benjamin Cisco of the United Federation of Planets. One moment he was standing, and the next moment he was thrown backwards, as if someone had lifted the ground beneath his feet and shaken it like a carpet. Surrounding him was a stormy rock landscape. But as he looked at Dax, he saw the garden, deep green foliage and bright flowers collapsing around her into a spinning ball of green light. He shouted to her, but the winds around him increased, swallowing his words. Light surrounded him, engulfing him until nothing remained but white light and furious storms. He struggled, felt himself sink into the light as if he were drowning in quicksand. Nearby, the green light coalesced into an orb, completely enveloping Dax. It sped into the dark, treacherous sky, carrying her with it. Cisco shouted again, lunged forward, only to be pulled under and utterly consumed by the light. At Ops, O'Brien studied his readouts and did his best not to react to the fact that the vessel bearing his new captain had just disappeared. It had seemed as if space had simply opened up, developed a rip, and the runabout had sailed right into it and had been swallowed alive. Kira crossed over to his station, bent over his shoulder, and looked at the monitor as if she just might throttle it. What the hell is happening out there? Another neutrino disruption. Kira nodded. Scanners are picking up an object near their last known coordinates. It isn't the runabout, or a starship. O'Brien checked his sensors and jerked his head up at the information. Major, there's something inside it. Some kind of life form. It's human. Kira took a moment to consider the consequences. Are the Cardassian sensors picking it up? O'Brien gave a nod. They should be back online by now. We have to assume they know everything we know. Kira made her decision. Yellow alert. Secure ops. Beam it aboard, Mr. O'Brien, but put it in a level 1 security field. Aye, sir. Locking on. O'Brien pressed the controls and was surprised and gratified when they responded immediately. What appeared on the transporter pad surprised him even more. A shimmering green ball of light materialized. It hovered for a millisecond after the transporter beam dimmed, then spun away with blinding speed, revealing a slightly dazed-looking, but unharmed, Lieutenant Dax. White light. The void. It was not death, not life, as Cisco knew it. A different place altogether. His body seemed to have disappeared. Everything had disappeared. The hellish landscape, the storms, the green orb, the runabout, Dax, himself. All of it gone. Cisco waited, existing. And then a waterfall of images cascading over him all at once. Jennifer on Gilgo Beach. She turned up toward him, frowning at the interruption. On the Saratoga, staring down at his own helpless hands. Suddenly, wearing a catcher's mitt, feeling the solid, satisfying slap of a baseball right in the center. Picard's face gone slack. In those eyes, the smoldering ghosts of the Saratoga. The sting of smoke in his lungs, his eyes, the deck ripped asunder, flames shooting up from the level below. Who are you? Sisko was uncertain whether the words issued from his voice or mind. There was silence. Then another tide of emotion and memory overwhelmed him. The feel of Jennifer's lips soft against his, Opaka's gentle fingertips against his face, Jake's shy Jennifer grin, fishing pole in his hand. Who are you? Sisko drew in a lungful of air and tasted sea. He stared down at his bare feet and saw that he stood on the edge of a beach blanket. Jennifer rolled onto her side, dark brows knit tightly above a pair of sunglasses. She spoke. It is corporeal, a physical entity. Sisko saw Jennifer and knew it was not Jennifer. What did you say? Reality shifted so suddenly he reeled. In the Enterprise observation lounge, Picard smiled, rose, extended a hand. It is responding to visual and auditory stimuli. Linguistic communication. Sisko felt a surge of hope. Yes, linguistic communication. Are you capable of communicating with me? Reality reeled again. Opaka cupped his face in her hand. Why do you harm us? Sisko's pulse quickened with excitement at the realization that he had established direct communication at last. I don't wish to harm anyone. On the main bridge view screen of the Saratoga, Locutus spoke in Picard's voice, but lifeless, grating, mechanical. You deceive us. No. I'm telling you the truth. Sisko turned, distracted to find himself surrounded by the Saratoga's crew. Rannoch, Tamamota, Captain Storrell. Yet, knowing all of them were aliens. The holodeck fishing pond, Jake, swinging his legs above the water, turning to Sisko with a frankly curious gaze. What are you? The Jake alien tilted his head, puzzled. Earth? Sisko gestured at their surroundings. This is what my planet looks like. The Jake alien looked around, clearly unable to appreciate what he was seeing. Sisko tried again. You and I are very different species. It will take time for us to understand one another. The Jake alien looked bewildered. Time? What is this time? At the situation table at the center of ops, Odo listened with Kira, O'Brien, and Bashir to Lieutenant Dax's explanation of what she and Commander Sisko had encountered. As head of station security, Odo's presence was not required at such a briefing, but he had a very good personal reason for paying careful attention to what Dax had to say. He was not the only one excited by Dax's report of a stable wormhole. Kira also leaned forward with keen interest. Navigational sensors will be useless. We won't be able to retrace the route to Benjamin's location. O'Brien nodded. Now that we know it's a wormhole, we can use a field density compensator. Dax hesitated. It's not an ordinary wormhole. My analysis suggests it isn't even a natural phenomenon. Odo stiffened at this news. Was it possible that his own people were somehow involved? Bashir marveled. Not natural? You mean it was constructed? Dax gave a single, graceful nod. It's very possible that whoever made the orbs also created this wormhole. A look of amazement crossed Kira's face. and she murmured to herself, "The Celestial Temple." She straightened defensively when Odo shot her a curious glance. O'Brien interrupted. "The Cardassians are leaving their position, on a course toward the Denorius Belt." Kira stood, frowning. "What would it take to move this station to the mouth of the wormhole?" O'Brien's jaw dropped open at the concept. "This isn't a starship, Major. We've got 6 working thrusters to power us, and that's it. A 160 million kilometer trip would take 2 months. We've got to be there tomorrow." O'Brien shook his head. "Well, that's not possible, sir. Find me a Class 6 starship to tow us." Kira was implacable. "Find another way. That wormhole might just reshape the future of this entire quadrant. The Bajorans have to stake a claim to it." She slapped the table with her palm, paced a few steps out of sheer frustration, and wheeled to face O'Brien again. "And I have to admit, that claim will be a lot stronger if there's a Federation presence there to back it up." Dax watched the entire exchange with utter calm, as if Benjamin's life and the future of the Bajora were not at stake. "Couldn't you modify the subspace field output of the deflector generators just enough to create a low-level field around the station?" O'Brien frowned at her, but his expression quickly metamorphosed into one of dawning revelation. "So we could lower the inertial mass?" Dax nodded, pleased. "If you could make the station lighter, those 6 thrusters would be all the power we would need." "Might just work, Lieutenant, but this whole station could break apart like an egg if it doesn't." Dax sighed in acknowledgement. "Even if it does work, we're going to need help from Starfleet once we get there." O'Brien turned to Dax. "The Enterprise is still the nearest starship. It would take them 2 days to get here." Dax gave him a look that said, "What other choice do we have?" "Ensign O'Brien, advise Starfleet that we will require their assistance." O'Brien nodded and turned his attention to his panel. Kira started for the corridor, looking over one shoulder at the still-seated group. "You have ops, Mr. O'Brien. I'm leading the rescue mission. Lieutenant Dax, you're with me." "You too, Doc. Time to be a hero." Unbidden, Odo followed, catching up to them. Kira noticed, and began a gentler-than-usual rebuke. "Constable," he did not let her finish. "This is a security matter. I'm in charge of security." Kira stopped at the turbolift, pressed a control, folded her arms. "Security here on the station. I can't justify taking you into this wormhole. We don't know what we're dealing with in there. It could be hostile." Odo sensed her hesitation and persisted. "Major, I was found in the Denorius Belt. I don't know where I came from. No idea if there are any others like me. All my life, I've been forced to pass myself off as one of you, always wondering who I really am. The answers to a lot of my questions may be somewhere on the other side of that wormhole." The doors parted as the lift arrived. Odo walked past Kira into the waiting lift. "You coming?" He saw her dark eyes narrow, saw the muscle in her jaw twitch once, twice. She glanced at Dax, at Bashir, clearly considering that Odo's insubordination made her look bad in front of the other officers. And then she gave a small, barely audible sigh of resignation, and her face relaxed. Odo smiled as Kira stepped onto the turbolift without another word. Sisko waited in pure, formless existence for the aliens to contact him again. After the mention of time to the Jake alien, he had sensed their confused retreat. They appeared again in the form of Jean-Luc Picard, standing in the Enterprise observation lounge, the planet Bajor serving as backdrop behind him. Picard gazed at him mistrustfully. "The creature must be destroyed before it destroys us." The scene shifted to the main view screen on the Saratoga, Locutus, flesh and metal.
It is malevolent.
Once again, the Enterprise observation lounge, with Deep Space Nine now appearing in the observation window, Picard spoke with a voice grown infinitely cool and remote. It must be destroyed. Sisko started at the sight of his body in his Starfleet uniform, at the realization that he was physically sitting in the observation lounge in the seat beside Picard's. He touched the chair, felt fabric beneath his fingers. He leaned forward, desperate to convince the alien Picard of his sincerity. I'm not your enemy. I've been sent here by people you contacted with your devices, your orbs. Picard, with cold disbelief, rose, clasped his hands behind him, and walked over to the observation window as if eager to put distance between himself and the human. We seek contact with other life forms, not corporeal creatures who would annihilate us. Sisko stood, breaking the pattern of the past. I have not come to annihilate anyone. Suddenly, around him, 100 flames were shining in the dark stone chamber beneath the monastery. Kai Opaka tenderly withdrew her hand from Sisko's cheek. Can you not see the damage you have already done? If I have caused you any harm, I deeply regret it. I am here only to find those who sent the orbs. Opaka considered this, her black pupils reflecting 1,000 flickering lights. For what purpose? To establish peaceful relations, as we have with hundreds of other species. She shrank from him mistrustfully. Hundreds of other corporeal species? But before he could answer, Sisko was again on the Saratoga's bridge, sitting in the chair next to Captain Storrell. Ensign Tamamoto swiveled from her navigation console to face him accusingly. This creature will lead them here. They will annihilate us. Sisko looked for help from Captain Storrell. The Vulcan regarded him calmly, then turned to face the main view screen as the image of Locutus opened its mouth. 1,000,000 echoing voices spoke as one.
Destroy it now.
Sisko propelled himself from his chair toward the view screen, shouting at the Borg-human hybrid. My species respects life above all else. Can you say the same? If you are going to destroy me, at least know who it is you destroy. Storrell faced him calmly and lifted a brow in mild annoyance. Sisko felt a glimmer of pain at the familiar gesture. We know all that we need to know. You endanger our domain. Sisko turned toward his dead shipmates. I do not understand the threat I bring to you. But I am not your enemy. Allow me to prove it. Rannoch swiveled from his console. Prove it? Sisko hesitated. It can be argued that a human is ultimately the sum of his experiences. Jake, squinting in the sun, turned his attention away from his fishing pole. Experiences? What is this? Memories, events from my past, like this one. The alien Jake scrunched his forehead and broke the surface of the blue pond with one dangling toe, watching as the ripples spread outward into infinity. Past? Jake blinked at him, absolutely stymied. What came before now is no different than what is now, or what is to come. It's one's existence. Sisko drew in a breath of amazement as he crouched beside the child, suddenly understanding. Then, for you, there is no linear time. Stretched out on the blanket, Jennifer lowered her sunglasses with a slender finger and stared at him over the rim. Linear time? What is this? Cisco set down the tray of lemonades in the sand and leaned toward her. My species lives in one point in time, and once we move beyond that point, it becomes the past, the future. All that is still to come does not exist yet for us. That is the nature of a linear existence, and if you examine it more closely, you will see that you do not need to fear me. He looked into those familiar brown eyes, flecked with gold, and saw through them for an instant to the alien presence beneath, to the hesitation, the fear. And Cisco waited. O'Brien was left at Ops with a handful of Bajoran techs, far too much recalcitrant Cardi technology, and a good deal of worry about whether they could get DS9 moving out of orbit and heading towards a wormhole. Damn it! Computer, analyze subspace field integrity. Power frequency imbalance is preventing field closure. Add reactor 3 to the power grid. O'Brien hurried to his monitor and watched a schematic of the station as the warp field almost enclosed it, then failed, dissolving. Partial field established. Partial field. Is the station's inertial mass low enough to break orbit? Procedure is not recommended at this time. O'Brien felt a muscle in his jaw begin to twitch. Damn it! I didn't ask for an opinion. Just tell me whether or not we can get enough thrust with only a partial field established. Affirmative. All right. Initiate transit mode. 3-axis stabilization. Engage. He checked his monitor and saw from the schematic that the thrusters were indeed firing. The deck beneath his feet began to vibrate. The stars in the overhead observation windows began to shift slowly. They were moving, breaking orbit. O'Brien moved to his monitors and began checking readouts. Warning. Field integrity declining. Station is now beyond safe shutdown velocity. Subspace field collapse in 60 seconds. The deck rocked slightly beneath O'Brien's feet. He scanned the readouts, searching for an answer. He lifted his face and shouted to the Bajoran techs. Does anyone here know if the inertial dampers can feed the deflectors? They returned blank stares. O'Brien glanced back down at his console. Good time to find out. Computer, transfer energy from the inertial dampers to reinforce the subspace field. He squinted at the monitor. Nothing was happening. Procedure is not recommended. Unable to comply. Warning. Subspace field collapse in 30 seconds. He wasted no more time on anger, but called over to the techs. I'm going to transfer it manually. On my mark. Redirect the flow to the deflectors. The Bajorans nodded. Now! O'Brien struggled with insane speed to work a dozen different controls. Nearby, the Bajoran techs worked with the same feverishness. The lights flickered, dimmed. O'Brien looked up at the schematic on his monitor and saw the field leap completely into place around the station. The whine ceased. The vibrations disappeared as the lights brightened again. Field energy now within flight tolerances. O'Brien released his breath explosively and smiled weakly over at the Bajoran techs, then returned his attention to his readouts. Computer, you and I have to have a little talk. Kira and Dax piloted the runabout. Odo sat behind the Major and across from Bashir, who gazed out of the observation window with the frank curiosity of a child. They rode together in tense silence, except for Dax. It was she who first spoke, peering down at her view screen. The Cardassian warship is in visual range. The stars on the overhead screen wavered, shifted to a view of the grim, giant vessel. Kira checked her instruments. They're going right to the wormhole. She drummed her fingers on the console, thinking. The question is whether or not they decide to believe us. But that's up to them. Kira pressed a control on the comm panel. This is the Federation ship Yangtze Qian, Major Kira Nerys in command. The image of Gul Dukat, in all his treacherous glory, appeared on the screen. He looked infinitely impatient at the concept of communicating with the Bajoran underling. Kira folded her arms as if trying to hold in her hatred. Gul Dukat, we know you're headed for the wormhole. I strongly suggest you do not proceed. We encountered a hostile life form inside. Commander Sisko has already been captured. We're about to attempt a rescue. Gul Dukat tilted his head as he listened. Perhaps they would be less hostile to Cardassians than humans. Odo interrupted with weary impatience. Dukat, you know I won't lie to you. And I know you probably won't listen to me, but these people are trying to save you from a lot of trouble. Dukat shook his head. Thank you for your concern. I suppose you'd also tell me these are not the life forms that sent the orbs, or that your commander Sisko is not negotiating for their technology. I think we'll see for ourselves. The view screen went black, then cleared to show stars. The Cardassian warship proceeded through the Denorius belt and disappeared as it entered the wormhole. Sisko sensed a ripple in the void, a stirring, and knew instinctively the aliens approached again. He was in Zegi Park again, in a younger, leaner body, sitting on a picnic blanket Jennifer had spread on the grass. It was a warm, cloudless day with an intensely blue sky and a cool breeze. The wind carried the reckless laughter of children. Jennifer lay cradled in his arms, breathing and warm and alive. She stirred in his arms, pointed to herself. Jennifer. The illusion was shattered. He pulled away from her, withdrew his arms quickly. Yes, that was her name. The alien with Jennifer's voice looked at him. She is part of your existence. Sisko looked away, out at the sunny horizon. She is part of my past. She's no longer alive. The alien considered this. Sisko half turned and saw the confusion on her face. He sighed. I lost her some time ago. Lost? What is this? He turned to gaze on her directly. Nothing but honest curiosity in her huge, dark eyes. In a linear existence, we can't go back to the past to get something we left behind. So it's lost. She drew back in disbelief. It is inconceivable that any species could exist in such a manner. Oh, you are deceiving us. He stood, looking out at the children playing soccer in the distance. No, this is the truth. This day, this park, it was almost 15 years ago. It was a very important day to me. A day that shaped every day that followed. That is the essence of a linear existence. Each day affects the next. The scene changed. He was on the Saratoga. The corridors were lined with flame and shrouded in smoke. Sisko could not go down that corridor. Could not do what was expected of him, not this time. Behind him, the alien spoke. But This is your existence. Cisco drew a hand across his perspiring brow. Yes, but it is difficult to return here. More difficult than any other memory. This was the day I lost Jennifer. Then why do you exist here? Uncomprehending, he stared at her, overwhelmed by fear, grief, confusion. He pushed himself away from the bulkhead, opened his mouth to plead for help and escape. The words died in his throat, flames froze in mid-leap, fleeing survivors in mid-stride, smoke hung, motionless, suspended in the air. Jennifer stood, breathless, lifeless. The memory's sudden suspension seemed desperately wrong. He watched as the burning corridor and those within began to melt away. A shrill, piercing whine filled Cisco's skull. He raised his hands to his ears to blot it out.